Welcome to Adventures in One Love. We want to thank you for joining us on today's episode. Today we are speaking with my sister, my friend, Autumn Brueckmann, who is an author. That's what we're going to be talking about today, but she's also a wife and a mom and an advocate for the community. And so I'm excited to get into this, but Autumn, can you kind of share a little bit about your background and some of the things that brought you into the awareness of some of these issues?
Yeah, so I'm a parent, like you said. We've got 5 kids. We're a foster adoptive family. And I had kind of on my heart to write a book for a while. I didn't really know what it would be about, but my husband and I periodically will stop and write future goals. So I have one from like 10 years ago, and it says, publish a book. But through the time, the idea of what that would look like has changed. I have my background in math education. That's what I did for a long time, but we started homeschooling our kids. And, just started reading the news and what's happening, what's going on. Started just having that on my heart of like, people need to know what's going on. People need to know the truth, and realizing how many people don't realize it. And just a way to kind of break into culture. I've been reading a lot of books by Eric Metaxas. He's reading a lot of biographies and just stories of people who have changed the world, who've done things to influence it, who are just ordinary people. And like, how do you do that? And we've seen in history different times where books and writing have been that culture drive that have changed people's minds. And so I think having a story, having somebody to connect with, helps people to connect with what's happening in a different way. There's a lot of people writing nonfiction, kind of writing their idea of what direction we should go, what we should do. But having a story just hits people in that unique way. So that's what I wanted to do with this book.
I love that. I had a revelation the other day, why Jesus taught in parables. And it's because they're not as easy to be offended. If I say, you need to change this, it's like, oh, hey, wait a minute. But if I'm like, hey, I know this person and this is what happened to them, it's like, it's a different way of processing the information. And so parables and stories are such an effective way of bringing things to light, but also in a non-aggressive way, but still confronting some truths, because you confront some serious truths in this book. Book is 2034, and it's very engaging. I will say it's intense. I happened to start reading it at night before I went to bed. I probably maybe not should have done that, because then my brain is like, oh my gosh, there's so many things going on I need to pay attention to. But how did the writing process look for you?
Well, for me, it was a busy season. I was at the same time working on my doctorate, homeschooling our kids. My husband's a pilot. He was traveling. So that's usually the first question I get. People is like, how did you do that?
Yeah.
But I think, this perspective of like how God uses our gifts, just when you give him your time, like he gives it back to you. Mm-hmm. So I would just have these windows of opportunity. And I also think of George Washington Carver. So he's a historical figure from time period where there's racial tension, and he's coming from the African American community, and just reading stories about him, and he would like invite God to work with him. So he's the one who invented peanut oil and a lot of other things to kind of help the community. But just reading his heart and the work that he did, it was always like God was just right there with him, like guiding him. And so with this book, it's not like God never told me what to say or what to write, but it's just like I would ask him, and like he was just with me, through that process. And just, reading the news, again, just seeing things that are happening and trying to connect this story with what's going on. And that's the purpose of having 2034. It's like, what's happening now? And if we keep pushing this, and if we keep extending this, what's that going to look like? And how is that going to affect people?
So I want to point out, because I think a lot of people who follow us are creatives, they're believers, and they're trying to use the gifts, what is in their hand. And, you found these pockets of time. You're mathematics, you're a teacher, you were an educator, and now you're educating your own children. Give me just what that looks like typically, because I am the person, I'm very literal. Like, did you time block? Did you, was your husband reading? Were you emailing him scripts while he was traveling? Like, what did that process, look like for you?
Yeah, well, a lot of it was when the kids were in bed. So, like, bedtime's pretty strict at our house for lots of reasons. But, when they were all in bed, that's kind of my time where I could focus on just what I was doing. there were other times I'd try to like add things here and there through the day. And then some nights when, my husband was home and I finished a chapter, he'd read through it with me and kind of make sure it made sense, try to, be that second pair of eyes to just look at what was going on. And so that was helpful and collaborative, but my brain's always going. So when I'm doing kind of like menial tasks or things, I would just be thinking of ideas and how to change it. But at the beginning, I kind of had this structure of just the general plot line for the story. But as it's going, like things could adjust and be changed, and I'd add something here or change something there. And so the characters kind of develop as you're going. So it's like a give and take. I had a structure, but I also had some flexibility through the process. So it was fun, but it was new. It's the first time I've written a novel, but it was an enjoyable process.
So how long did it take start to finish?
For writing, about a year, and then there was a couple months of the editing process, and then kind of deciding. It took me a while to decide to go with self-publishing. I tried to go out to some different publishers, but just by nature of the topic of the book and the timeliness, it takes a long time to get through traditional publishing, as I found out. So I decided to do self-publishing.
And you've been doing a lot of your own marketing and promoting. You've started kind of like a podcast. Can you share a little bit of like, not only did you like write it, you're kind of opened up to a whole different world of marketing now too in this process.
Yes, that's been a learning curve, something new that's come along with it. But it's also been exciting, like just the opportunities we've had to have these conversations, to open dialogue up, to hear other people's stories, just as we've engaged and opened up about some topics that can be challenging, but that people need to be able to discuss.
So in regards to the book, did you read the book 1984 and was like, how clever would it be if we kind of modernized it to today? Is that kind of was the inspiration?
Well, I had read the book 1984 in high school. And since then, you hear people talk about it and reference it and talk about Big Brother and big government. And everybody wants to be, not like 1984. Right? Everyone kind of knows that that's bad. But I think we've become so used to it, so used to that conversation, so used to the exact storyline of 1984 that we don't see how those things are actually happening today. It's just kind of become a normal thing that people say. So I wanted to say, like, well, what does this look like, these ideas? What does this look like in our culture specifically? So I took some of those themes and integrated it into what's happening now.
Well, and I will say, we want to be an encouragement to creatives, but this book really is for everyone, really, especially believers who are really trying to, what does God say about some of these things that you bring up? And so, to get into the book, give the overall storyline about what 2034, A Cautionary Tale, is about.
Yeah, well, so I don't want to give any spoilers, but basically it starts with Georgiana Wellington, and she's our protagonist, and she's very innocent, kind of going through her story. And just the world around her is changing. Her family's facing just the government coming on, just big pharma, big business, just all these different powerful entities kind of working together to create this controlled society where there's really only one path that you're supposed to follow, and you're not really supposed to step out of line. And if you do, then you'll kind of silently face the consequences for that. So just that coercive force. And so she's kind of going through this, and at first she's not really, taking a side. She's just trying to live her life. And I did that on purpose. I think there's a lot of people like that who are they're just trying to live their life. They don't think they need to take a side. But it hits a point where she has to, right? She has to decide if she's going to live this life that she's supposed to live and fall in line with the norm, or if she's going to step outside of that and be willing to take that risk and live the life that she wants to have.
I will say, so there are you talk about big government, you talk about big enterprise, you talk about the medical industry and big pharma, but you're also hitting topics like family division and gender issues and sexual identity, and a lot of those hot topics that are, I think a lot of I think a lot of believers in general are either really aggressive about it, and then they're not meeting anybody with any compassion or love, or they're overly graceful. And I feel like by pointing out what is the fruit, what happens when it's not addressed, I think you do that really masterfully by showing like, okay, we can be super graceful and say everyone's got their journey and I'm not going to really be a part of it. But as a community, it does affect everyone. It does, you don't sin in a vacuum. Your sin affects those people around you. And I think you do that so well here. One of the, you have some really powerful statements like, and we spoke about this on the live last night, control is freedom. And I think when we think about that, the big picture, well, we trust the authority that's in place. We vote these officials in. We are, we hope we're doing the right thing, and they run on certain policies. But this idea is so heavily enforced. Like, control is freedom. You are free because we've created this controlled environment for you. What was the inspiration or the mind thought behind that?
So I have a few of those little phrases. So that was a tie-in to 1984. So his line was slavery is freedom. And I was trying to take that and say, well, how is that happening today? And I think today it's that idea that if we give up what we think we should do to what the government wants, then they're trying to promise us that you'll have a better life. And we see this, right? We talked about the issue of censorship, where the government's really saying, well, let us control what people are allowed to say, as if, we're protecting you, and you won't hear any of those things you don't want to hear, and you won't be exposed to, misinformation. They talk about misinformation like it's some terrible disease or something, but they're getting that idea across. And we see that, with the vaccine mandate, just this whole well, let us control what you decide. Let us control what you're going to do. And it's going to, they're promising that it's going to make everybody healthy and everyone better. And just, we see that kind of interaction with a lot of things, but just that promise of give us control and we'll give you, what looks like freedom, what they're marketing as freedom, but in the end, it's not going to be.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because I think a lot of times we get easily confused because there's a lot of information. I mean, this is the information age. There's so much access to on my phone, right? Like everywhere I go, I'm getting an update. If I have a news app, I'm going to get an update on a new thing that's happening out there. I think what's interesting is that as we are pursuing this information, you have to ask can I really believe this? Okay, I read things on the internet all the time, so I'm guilty of reading news online, but I always have to check myself. Okay, wait, what website am I reading this on? Is Yahoo my source? Are they the ones that are disseminating this information? And then I think, then I go through another filter. I ask the Lord, is this something I need to be worried about? Is this something that I need to be involved with? Is this something that I need to educate myself more on? And I think just by nature of being in ministry and serving others and ministering, counseling services to others, I'm interested in many of these topics naturally. But how do you encourage people to because that's my habit, and it's been my habit because I don't want to give out bad information But how do you recommend somebody who's okay, this is a lot for me? How do I start learning some of these things?
Yeah, so I think choosing the most important topics, because for me, I will mentally choose a topic that's I know that it would take me a lot of time to figure out the truth for this, and it's not really relevant to me, and I kind of set it aside. So for me personally, a lot of foreign policy and that kind of stuff, I'll be that's kind of a big topic, and I don't think I'm going to invest into knowing what's the right and wrong of that. Just kind of picking what's relevant to your family and your situation that you really need to know about. And then, like you said, kind of filtering out what are good news sources and what aren't. So one way is to take something that you do know about and see what those sources say about it. So this is the example that comes to my mind that really made me stop reading certain news stations. Was I had watched the Republican National Convention, and then I would look up what people were saying about it. And there were certain websites that gave no substance, no information about what actually happened, like not the speaker's names, not their topics. Like even if they disagreed with everyone, they didn't say anything that actually happened. They literally just said it was terrible, and the only thing I liked was the national anthem, and that was it. And after reading that, it was like, if someone reads this, like they don't know anything about the truth about what really happened. You know, whether they agree or disagree, they just don't know. And so I stopped getting information from those sources because I knew they were intentionally suppressing what happened. And I chose other ones. So I think having that insight and trying to, you know, look at different sources and see what some topics you know about and which one lines up with what you know and with what you've experienced. It's always good to look at more than one, but having that ability to kind of decipher who's willing to say things and who's hiding it.
Yeah, I really liked how, I think a really most recent situation was Neo. And you talked about Neo, how he kind of came out and said, I have sons, I have daughters. This is how I raise my children. And the statement that he made, it got a lot of backlash. And his publicist issued the apology. And so then everybody thought, oh, Neo's backtracking. And he came back out again. And he's like, no, that apology was not from me. And so I think even people I think there's just so much conflict around these topics. And there's some people who want to toe it and be very overly cautious. And there's some people that are like, no, this is my truth. I get to say what I think.
Yeah.
And so how do you encourage, I mean, do you think that maybe if people have questions, they keep it in community, like they find other parents that they can talk through? Like, how do you recommend people?
I'd say both. I think it's good to look at the sources that are available to us, but always backing that up with your own personal experience, what you see, what you observe, and people around you. Like, I've gained so much insight just from people that I've talked to and communicated with. And it helps you. It helps you not get stuck in, you know, worrying about something or being afraid of something, or maybe just seeing it from a slanted point of view, just having those conversations with your own family, friends, coworkers, and just seeing what they think. And even if they disagree with you, it can still help you to just gain your perspective on those issues.
And I think part of our conversation last night that you may be wrong. And it's okay to be wrong on a topic and asking someone and learning. And I think that's the part of these things that are changing so quickly. There has to be an element of humility in this, because there are things that are not a one size fits all. Yeah. There are many that have gender dysphoria, and for them they have one experience, but their family has a very different experience. And so these are things that we can't just make a blanket statement and cover. But you bring out some things, and I would say that there were some moments, truthfully, that I read in the book and I was like, that feels a little far-fetched. But then I would pray about it. And I'm like, Lord, is that something that could really happen? And the Lord really kind of opened my mind to like, yeah, like if things don't, like, where are things today? And there's one thing that, when in school, the nurses are encouraged to keep student privacy, and they are prohibited from sharing information with their parents. And so there's a scene, it feels very drastic, and I'm like, that wouldn't happen. But then I recalled, I took my daughter to a doctor's appointment, and she's over 18 now, but I still go with them. And the doctor looked at me and was like, I'm gonna need to talk to her alone. And I was like, I don't mind, but that's weird. Like, I had to make it known outside. And, my daughter was like, she could stay. And the doctor was like, no, it's okay. I just need to, it'll just take a minute. And it just was it was a millisecond moment. And it just made me, it brought me back to that moment of like, oh, no, you may not be a part of all those conversations. And I mean, it's overwhelming for me as an adult dealing with the medical system. But yeah, here, you say over and over again, Georgiana had to state the same things: her grade, her age, her interest, her gender identity, her sexual orientation, her drug use, her sexual habits, and on the surveys went. And I just thought, how exhausting. Like, what a burden. Like, you know, I'm speaking to so many young people, and they don't even know what they want to do with their future, but there are all these things that they have to answer to in their circle. So how did you, because again, that feels like, wow, that's so much, but how did you come to that conclusion?
So for me, with my background in education, I'll be reading kind of those stories of what's happening with teachers and in the classroom. And there are teachers who are asked, you know, to hide gender identity. I actually talked briefly in one of our other videos, but I worked at a school that was like that. There was a student who was transgender and the parents didn't know, but at school they functioned as a different gender identity. So that reality of that divide of people that they're so fixated on this idea of gender identity and that everyone has to choose, and you know, that's just their focal point, that they completely forget about the importance of family and the importance of the bond a child has with their parents and the importance of the perspective that a parent has. You know, the parents know the child longer than the teacher or the counselor. Just the value of that insight and input, even if the child's legitimately having a struggle. Like, you should never ostracize the parent from that. But that is happening. So this is an extension of that divide between what's happening at school and what's happening in parents. And even I heard a story referring to the doctor's office where a dad, I don't remember if it was a dad or mom, but they took their child to the doctor. And they were there in the room. The child was young, but the doctor asked the child what their gender identity was. And the parent was very upset because they they taught their children that they are what they're born as. And here's the doctor just planting that seed of a completely different ideology in the child's mind. You know, and the parent, intervened, but just that, that the doctor isn't talking to the parent about how to navigate the issue. They're talking directly to the child. And we see this mindset in just a lot of people in the community who are very willing to just go directly to the child, override any authority that the parent has with this issue of gender.
Hey guys, so part of the work that we're doing at One Love United and through adventures, through our missions, is we are creating opportunities for locals in the Caribbean to create economic stability. And so one of the farms that we've partnered with is Hacienda Tres Angeles. And part of what we're doing with them not only is bringing attention to the amazing sustainability practices, to the way that they are elevating the surrounding community and at juntas. The Farmer One is educating other farmers on growing practices and utilizing all the resources. So we want to support that kind of work. And so we've come alongside them. We are bringing the coffee here stateside and we are selling it. We've got whole bean, we've got ground. It is 100% Puerto Rican coffee, meaning it's all grown on their farm, on their plants, and it's processed, roasted, and packaged all in one place. And so the product is amazing. It is a product of excellence that you want to get a taste and see how good the Lord is and what the Lord is doing there. We've also got some amazing chocolates. We are trying to see other ways to utilize these products. And so we've created Embrace Caribe. And it's a way that we are sharing the products of the Caribbean, sharing the excellence of the Caribbean with those of the diaspora like me and those who just love the islands and love the culture. So we'd love your support. Check out the website in the description below on how you can get some of these great products. And I've heard stories, especially when there's a young lady that she went through a transition and she was reversing the transition, and she was angry at the medical professionals who were advising her that taking these certain medications that were going to stop her from advancing through puberty. She was angry at the manipulation that had occurred. And it really made me question, why push that so hard? That was just it's one thing that, there's a gentleman, he was a former Navy SEAL, and he went to his psychologist and he said, I'm really struggling with some things and kind of struggling with my identity, and sometimes I feel like I'd be more comfortable as a woman. You have you are meant to be a woman. They began the medication process to transition him to become a trans female. He had sons, and so he becomes a woman. A manly man becomes a woman, because he was struggling with his identity. And then as he kind of works through this, he's like, I realize now I was kind of pushed, coerced to this mindset. How much are you hearing that people are actually, I'm struggling, oh, this is what it is. And then they're kind of coerced. Why do you think that's happening?
Well, that's a great question, the why question. And I think, that's kind of a big purpose of the book, is just that being able to question. Because I think people go to doctors and therapists and counselors and they think, well, this person has a degree, well, this person's educated, this person knows better. And so they'll even go against their intuition and against their hesitation and think, well, I'm supposed to trust them. And the reality behind the why, there's really no nice answer. There's really only, I think, two answers. One is they're either involved in the corruption, which is financial benefit, just a personal gain, just from pharmaceuticals, the money that they make off of the medications that they give for the transitions, the money that they make off of the surgeries. And then the only other option is that they've bought into the lie from those who are in the corruption. So I think there are people who are well-meaning, who just, they really believe that people are supposed to be able to choose. They really believe that people are happier when they express themselves. They haven't taken the time to really look at what's happening to people who are going through this, and they just accept that I'm supposed to believe that, so I do.
I think that's a really good point. I think we're almost even in a time where we're seeing the results. We're seeing the fruit of these young people being encouraged to transition at a very young age, encouraged to get surgeries to change their body at a very young age. And then now they're adults and they're saying, I made a mistake. This is not what I actually, and there's different testimonies out there. There's some people that are very content in their transition. But I think for those people, one of the answers that I hear a lot is, let them get to the age where they can really make a sound decision. Before you're giving them medication to change their chemical makeup, before you're doing surgery, let them get old enough to really decide. And are you hearing any alternative responses to things like that?
No, I would say that's the same. Because, the issue of, if you should choose your own gender, like, that's one conversation. But then when it gets to the kids, it's like, we have to figure this one out first. They take priority. It's their innocence and that they're victimized, really, because they don't have that ability to process. And I think I've also heard stories with the parents being told, they're going to commit suicide if you don't do this. It's just this manipulation tactic. And I think what's another factor that's also very sad is when the parents disagree, and you have one parent who is like, no, the child doesn't need to transition, and they don't support that. And a lot of courts will favor the parent who wants the child to transition. And it's hard, and that's so difficult for the parent who doesn't want it, because they really just lose their power to protect their child from what's being done to them. And I think also there's the issue of puberty. A lot of kids, if they just go through the process, and I don't know, sometimes I think it's ridiculous, the things I hear, like kids invited to a club after school and they're told things like, well, if you're uncomfortable in your body, or if you're, just don't feel good, maybe, you're on the gender spectrum. And it's like, what kid liked puberty? Like, no one. What 12-year-old kid are going to be like, do you like your body the way it is? Like, they're all going to be questioning it and being like, oh, is something wrong with me? Instead of being taught that, like, this is normal. Like, everyone goes through this awkward, like, figuring out what's happening physically to you as you become an adult. And just we have these adults who are taking that moment in a kid's life and kind of monopolizing it and getting them on this track that's just leading them away from really who they truly are. And we need parents and grandparents, everyone who's on the side of that child to see that and be able to speak that true identity into them, that, like, it's okay, it's a process, and give it that time and allow them to develop and mature.
I know with 5 children, Greg and I have 5 children as well, and they each went through something very different. And everyone, it wasn't like identical where at this age this happened. Everyone had their own journey and their own struggle and they're still like navigating young adulthood. How are you seeing that in your own children, having a mix of foster children and adoptive children? How are you seeing that?
Yeah, well, for us, ours aren't quite at the age of like puberty yet, but we still, that identity, that concept of like, who do I belong to, with the foster and adopted children. And so that's huge for us, of just, you belong and we're family and just, we love having you here. And even when they maybe aren't ready to let go of their past, we're still always like, well, we're happy you're here. Like, it's okay that you're sad. It's okay that you miss, the other people that you have lived with, but we're happy and we're blessed. And we always speak that into them, that it's a positive thing, that they're here and that they have a place where they belong. And I think it's so important for all parents to just speak positive identity into your kids, especially just in the culture that we have, that it's so important to just tell your kids who they are, things that you might think are obvious or that they already know. Like, just say it, say how they're developing. And I think even connecting it with their gender, you're becoming a beautiful young lady, you're becoming a strong man, you're just anything, any positive characteristic, your leadership, your kindness, connecting that to their gender, so they kind of see who they are in a positive way in a culture that's going to push back on that. I think one of the challenges that we have just with our kids, I think a lot of parents face, is knowing when to talk about some of these things. Because I think it's constantly pushed younger and younger. And it's like, you don't want to take away your child's innocence from these things, but you want to be the first one to speak into your child's life. So I think it's a balance of protecting and shielding your children from things and not letting them just be exposed to everything. But also at a certain point, you have to let them know what reality they're going to face. And you have to have those harsh conversations about sexuality, about gender identity, about what's happening in our culture and how they can think through it, and making sure that they know they can come talk to you when they have questions.
Right. Yeah, that we're the safe place. And I think us overreacting or responding in fear or in our own confusion, we can affect our children in that same way, and that brings more confusion. So I think even admitting, and I say this for myself, I would have to often admit to my children, like, I'm still learning and I'm trying to figure this out. So be patient with me. I'm going to do my best to learn what I need, that I can help you, but be patient. And if I get it wrong, I promise I will tell you. And I've apologized to my children, and that has given me good fruit. When I've said the wrong thing or I've done the wrong thing, going back and acknowledging it gives them the example, one, that they can do the same thing. They can get it wrong and they can apologize and make it right. But that we're all fallible. We're all learning. And so that creates a safe place too. But I think, you're saying, when is the right time? And you brought up an interesting point in one of your videos. Children are getting exposed to, you can have every buffer, every filter. You can make sure their access is to good content and it's unquestionable. But then as soon as they go out those doors, it can happen on the way to the bathroom with a friend. It can happen on the school bus. I mean, there's a lot of access because of phones.
Yeah.
It happened to my children. Some of my children were exposed to pornography because of a friend. And despite me having such open communication with my children, it took me a while to find out, because they were confused and overwhelmed and they didn't really know how to process it. So I really appreciate when you say it's coming younger and younger. Don't, just because they act one way or they say one thing, you might need to really educate yourself on how to start these conversations, because you have a saying in here, sex is love. And I just, there was a part of me that just broke my heart, because I grew up in a very over-sexualized, I think women in general are very over-sexualized, but I think in our communities, I had a full figure at a very young age. And so I heard comments and I was talked to in certain ways that I didn't understand. And that over-sexualization, it just begins this desensitization, like, well, oh yeah, guys say that to me all the time. And it becomes that it's not even offensive anymore. And so I think conversations about gender and, you're being confused about who you are, and, sex is love and sex is okay. I think the church is not doing a good enough job to educate. I have a verse that really, it talks about, when we commit sin, it's against others. But when we commit sexual sin, it is against ourselves. And that has a consequence. It's not like I can go to you and say, hey, I responded in anger. Can you please forgive me? But when it's a sin against myself, if you carry that guilt and that shame, and even in our time of ministering, very often Holy Spirit reveals they need to forgive themselves. It's the last thing that people will just hold on to, like, no, I did this. I chose this. And I, part of my healing process, the Lord really showed me I was making those decisions from a broken place, from a misinformed and perverted place. And so I think this is where we have to slow down and really think about things, process them, talk about them. Because this over-sexualization of children, it's happening. We see it with Balenciaga. They had the most obscene ad, essentially children looking like they're in like a bondage outfits. I mean, it was so outrageous, so obvious.
Yeah.
And the outrage was so limited. It was just like, this is artistic expression, but at a child's expense.
Yeah. Yeah, it's become, like you said, it's become so normalized. We've become desensitized to it. And I think with that phrase, sex is love, I think a lot of people, back to that identity thing, they take that, like that sexual identity, their gender identity, and it's like, well, that's who I am. And they make that their entire personhood. And so when you come at them, and when you come to them and you say that that's wrong, that what you're doing is destructive, they think it's about them as a person. Mm-hmm. And it's like there's a separation between you as a human being and sex. Like, sex is not your entire identity of who you are. It's something that you can do and participate in, as sexuality is a part of being a human, but it's not who you are as a person. And so I think our culture really just has overemphasized sexuality so much that people make it so much a part of their personal identity. And then when you were talking about your journey, I was just thinking about this whole culture of sex is love, and people who they can't acknowledge that it's wrong. And because they can't acknowledge it's wrong, they can't get to that place of healing and that place of growth and coming out of really what's an addiction for a lot of people to this lifestyle. But you have to first be willing to acknowledge that this isn't healthy and this isn't good. And then when you can acknowledge that it's wrong, then you can move to that place of accepting forgiveness, from Christ and for yourself.
I think that there's something to be said for the cultural influences. I think, part of how I saw everything through the lens of sex. Men were this, women were this. If you were a beautiful woman, you were treated one way. If you were very smart, you were treated another way. And so I responded by becoming I would almost demean my outward appearance, because I was like, I want to be acknowledged for being smart. I don't want to be acknowledged for just how I look or what I offer physically. And that was a conscious decision that I made, that still stopped what God intended. He gifted me with my body, and I was only valuing one side of myself because of the way that I'd been treated, because of the sin in this world. But I'm still rejecting a part of myself. And I think that's the argument for those who are struggling with gender dysphoria. They're saying, I'm rejecting a part of my identity. And I think that is something that we have to realize. The enemy is so clever. He takes a truth that you really should love your whole self and you should accept yourself for how you am. I love dance. I'm a really good dancer, but naturally I'm kind of clumsy. I can just be, step off the curb. I just have those kind of tendencies. Both can be true. And so I think this is something that the Lord is really trying to speak to the body and even believers, because I can't give you the encouragement to love yourself if I don't love myself. if I don't truly understand what that means? And so I think something else that I have been seeing is there are orphans. There are people that are struggling with the mindset of an orphan spirit. And so they may have parents, but still feel like they don't belong, that they don't belong to where they are. And so that leads them on, okay, where do I fit? Where do I belong? And that orphan spirit will have you performing and trying to prove and pushing yourself. And I think that leads us to these things. Well, I don't love myself, so I'm going to try this. Maybe this will help me love myself. Okay, that didn't work. Let's try this. And then, and then I think we get to a point where we're so tired of trying, then we begin to self-medicate. And you talk a lot in your book about drug use and almost the encouragement of drug use. Talk me through that a little bit about how you came to that.
Yeah, well, I think there's two sides of it. One is what we'd see as the illegal substances and drug use, and just this culture of validation, which again, it kind of ties in this whole concept of love and what it means to love. And we've almost equated the word love with acceptance, and that, well, if you don't accept it, then you don't love me. And it's like, well, if someone is abusing drug substances, like they're really destroying their lives. And for you to say that that's okay is not a statement of love. I mean, to just let them live in that is awful. I mean, just the things, coming from, foster parenting, there's so many children who are in the system because of adults who have been drug users and the devastation that comes with that. So it's not a loving statement, but we still see, I see articles and posters and things that really validate that lifestyle and want to just diminish any type of consequence for it and accept that as like, okay, so long as they use that, as long as you're not hurting anybody. It's like, well, it's hurting the person using it for one thing, always.
Yeah.
But it's also hurting their family, their friends, if they have children. It's devastating. But that kind of plays out in the book. But then also this issue of jumping to medication first as kind of a quick fix for issues. And I think this happens in a lot of different areas. And again, it doesn't mean that we should never use medication. It's just we shouldn't just first say, oh, there's a problem, let's just medicate it. It's like, well, what's going on? Like, what's happening socially? What's happening in the family? What's the child going through? And that same concept ties in with this whole gender issue. Like what you're saying about how you kind of wanted to dress differently. I think there's a lot of girls who feel that way. They felt that burden of being sexualized too young, and they just want to be a different gender. And it's like, if you're giving them medication and puberty blockers for even if it's not puberty blockers, medication for depression, anxiety, but you're not actually addressing what's happening with the child. You're not fixing anything. It's like if someone's arm gets cut off and you just stick a Band-Aid on it, like you're not helping them. Like the child has something wounded inside of them, and they need some capacity to work through that, to have conversations about it, to realign their mindset. And you can't just throw a pill at that problem and think that's just going to fix it.
I'm going to interrupt this video real quick to see if maybe you know someone or you yourself are interested in interning in a ministry. We have a call out that we would love for people to come and help and learn. That maybe you're interested in digital missions, maybe you're interested in physical missions, that we're always looking for people to come alongside us in this ministry, to labor together, to grow and share the gospel and the love of Christ with others. If so, find out how to contact us in the information below. Now let's get back to the rest of the video.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. And I have been guilty of it. And I think the Lord really has even kind of, if I have a headache, I'm not praying first all the time. I'm not like, oh, Lord, I have this headache. Can you please take it away? I'm like, oh, I have a headache. This is very inconvenient. And I think that is the same mentality of, this is inconvenient. It's stopping what I'm wanting to do or supposed to do or my responsibilities. I need this fixed quickly. And what I see, especially in this time and culture, there are so many distractions. We are numbing the mind. And in the name of, oh, well, I'm watching TikToks and I'm watching these videos on, and even an educational topic. Those things can become dangerous if we profess to love Christ and we are not asking Holy Spirit, what should I do about this situation? And I think, there's been times where I've seen a situation with my children, and in my human mind, I think this is what we need to do. But then as a believer, I would pray and the Lord would say, don't do anything. And I'm like, that doesn't make sense. And I think that's the part of walking by faith and really trusting the Lord in these situations. Especially with these things, we should be taking everything to prayer. And I mean, what is your stance on some of the spiritual aspects of what we're seeing with drug use and sexual identity and over-sexualization and gender? What are some of the spiritual implications of this?
Well, I think the big picture is just this concept of truth, because we live in a culture where people are like, well, I make my own truth. I decide what's true. I decide what's right. I decide what's wrong. And this idea that there is an absolute truth, that there is a reality that you can't decide, like they don't want that, because then that would ruin the truth that they've made for themselves. So I think a lot of these problems stem from that. I mean, especially when you're talking about the gender, like they want the biological truth that has been accepted, right, for so long, right? They even reject that like, well, I should still be able to decide for myself. And, in Scripture we see, right, Jesus is the truth. So the ultimate fulfillment of finding the truth, of understanding reality, is finding Christ. But I think that, the truth, the value of the truth is applicable to all fields, right? Anything that you study, anything that you look at, the arts, the sciences, social issues, everything. If you want to get value out of it, you have to look at what's true. And that's also true in politics. It's also true in the roles of government. And you have to look at reality and know what's really happening with people. And so I think that connection with what's happening to our country and what's happening to just people in terms of their faith is just that idea of like what is true, what's real, and what's actually happening. And we've got to get back to a place where we can recognize that there is a reality. There is a God who made us. There's some things that are beyond our control. And until we get to that foundation of what is really happening, we're not going to be able to make progress.
I read somewhere that Americans in general have somewhat of a hard time with the idea of and I hope this is the right word, of a theocracy, where there is one ruler, he's the boss, he's the one who dictates everything. And, as Americans, we have this, I have freedom. I get to choose. I am the creator of my destiny. And now we have this God who is saying, I have a plan and purpose for your life. And so the path to get there is narrow. So that means you're gonna have to be submitted to me. And so I think politically we have this one mindset. Through the word and spiritually we have another truth. And I see those clashing even in the church. And I think that's what's that confusion and a lack of submission is really, and us submitting to the Lord individually in our own walk. I feel like there's such a resistance to that. And so how do you encourage your children, even at a young age now, to begin to understand that that's part of what's going to lead them to success? What does that look like on a practice? Because there's going to be some parents out there that are like, these issues are so overwhelming for me. How can I just minister to my child and guide them in that truth?
Yeah, well, I think where our kids are at now, we're really just focused on that foundation of biblical truth, of who God sees them as, of their identity as a person, of who God is. Because if they can get that foundation, that understanding of how we work as people in our relationship with God and how we're meant to function in our relationship with each other, that's going to be an asset to them no matter what happens in the culture, no matter how things change. They'll have that solidly in them, and they'll know who they are and how they can respond. And so, our culture is going to, 10 years, we're going to be having different conversations about what's going on. But that truth about how humankind functions, about what our interactions meant to be with God and with each other, that's not going to change. So understanding that. And as that ties in with government, like you're saying, with the submission, right? So we have the government that wants us to submit in an unhealthy way, but then we have God who wants us to submit in a way that's a blessing for us. And so we see that hierarchy of authority. And I think Christians sometimes, we forget our examples in history, our forefathers, the Christians who have gone before us, who really recognize that God is the ultimate authority, not the government. And even though they might value the role of the government, they know who the Lord is, and they're willing to do things in defiance of the government because it's in accordance with the will of God. And so an example that I think of is like the Underground Railroad, right? People who, right, they recognized the evils of slavery and how that's contrary to the Word of God, because we saw a lot of Christians were the ones doing that slaves would get out of freedom because a Christian was willing to defy the law and house them in their home. And I think we're going, we'll see what happens with our country, but we could be going to a place where we have to be willing to do those things where, even we've seen it, churches have to be willing to say, well, I know the government says we can't meet, but we're still going to meet. I know the government says we can't sing worship songs, but we're still going to sing worship songs. Like, what do you value and whose authority are you going to submit to?
Amen. I want to thank you for being brave and writing this. You've had some really hard, brave conversations that, are going to open you up to a lot of criticism, a lot of critique. And I think if you're a believer and you're not being critiqued in some way, then maybe you're on the wrong team. Maybe you're not doing the right thing, because this is a walk that is, it's not common, and it's very contrary to what the world is living. So I just want to commend you for being bold and bringing to light some of these things. And so I will tell you, as a very avid reader, this is a great story. You do a great job developing your characters. And I don't know if everybody reads like this, but the ending for me has got to be like, okay, like I have to feel good about the ending. And your ending is amazing. I love the way you end it, and I'm not going to give anything away. You really should read the book. But I will say, maybe not before bed, because there are some hot topics that you're just like, oh, how is this happening? But well done. And I want to encourage you, where can they find your information? Where can they buy the book?
So we've got our social media is at AU Brueckmann, so AUBRUECKMANN. We're on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And our book's at Amazon, so there's paperback, or you can get it on the Kindle.
And it's a beautiful cover, by the way. A little bit intimidating, but it's really beautifully done. So well done on that. Guys, this is stuff that we can't hide from. I would love to say that all of the work that we do for the kingdom is fun and joy and easy, but there are hard things that the Lord is calling us to. And really the identity of our children is critical. If they don't know who they are, and they don't know whose they are, then they really are going to just fall into the masses and be misled. And so I just encourage you, read the book, but also begin to educate yourself. Ask the Lord, what should I be really investing my time in learning about? Talk to your children. Ask them, what are some of the things that they're talking about in class? And that's whether it's in a Christian school, whether it's in a public school, whether even if you're homeschooling and maybe you have a co-op. What are the conversations that are happening? And what are some of the prayer requests that are not private, that are not, when they say, I need prayer? What are some of those things that people need prayer? And pray, engage in that, and pray for your children, pray for their friends, be intentional, because these are some consequences that can't be undone. And so thank you for your work and for your time.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yes, thank you, and thank you for watching through this whole conversation. We really appreciate your support. Make sure that you make sure you subscribe, share this video with somebody who's got young children, share this video with someone who's interested in some of the issues of today and they want to create more conversation about it. Because guys, one person can make a difference, because it does start with one, and it starts with you. God bless you.